Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Maria, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Kate. I'm super excited.
Well, I love talking about all things fitness, and your area being in sort of perimenopause and menopausal health is right on sort of target of what we chat about on the podcast so often. So, before we dive into our conversation today, can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes. Hi, I'm Maria Luque. I am a health science professor and fitness expert with over 2 decades of experience. And I have stumbled across menopause really during my dissertation when I had to pick a topic. And I found that women in my surrounding area, really people that were in my life and clients, were struggling with menopause. And I thought fitness has to make a difference on quality of life. And so I used that to do a research study on that. And that was over a decade ago. And I'm still here and I'm still doing this. And I'm always really excited to talk about menopause and just help women feel more empowered and more confident to go into the stage of life.
Well, I think menopause is one of those things that nobody used to talk about. And now, probably in the last sort of, I would say 3 to 5 years, there's a lot more, talk and information coming out. But I still think there's a lot of questions that women have around menopause and what does it mean and what should I be doing fitness wise and health wise and, hormone replacement therapy. So, can you just explain a little bit about what menopause is to begin with?
Yes, so menopause, you're absolutely right. So I think that in the last, I'd dare to say the last 2 or 3 years, it's really had its moment and it's becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And everybody's wants a piece of the puzzle at this point when we're talking about menopause, which makes it a little bit more confusing because women are inundated at this point with information and not quite knowing what is right and what is wrong. So I always like to just dive right into the middle. And it is menopause is often used as an umbrella term to define the different stages of menopause. But most of the time when women talk about menopause, they refer to perimenopause, which is that time of hormonal changes, it's turbulences, fluctions, and it can last anywhere from a year to 10 years. Some women experience symptoms. And menopause itself is really a moment in time when a woman hasn't had a period for 12 months. And that is the time, just that moment in time. And then after that, it's postmenopause. But menopause is used often as an umbrella term to cover all of that period of time.
And when it comes to fitness, what are some of the things we should be thinking about when we come to this time in our life? Because I know being a nutritionist and being a Pilates instructor, I've got some knowledge around, building bone strength and muscle strength. But I think for the, average woman out there who has been really busy up until that point in their life, maybe working lots and raising kids, and maybe their fitness is dropped off a little bit, or maybe they're having joint pain, it can feel a little bit overwhelming of, where do I start?
100%. And I do think that when it comes to movement at this stage in life, muscle growth becomes one of the most important parts of fitness itself. We have to build muscle just because we're losing muscle at an accelerated rate already, just normal aging, regardless of your gender. But menopause really speeds up that muscle loss. So getting into a routine that involves some sort of resistance training becomes incredibly crucial just for quality of life, functional life, being able to move around. We are expected to live longer, and yet we are not doing a lot of times things that enable us to have a good quality of life later. That said, often when I have conversations about resistance training, people immediately think it requires going to a gym or big heavy weights, a lot of grunting, crossfitting, like all of these things. And so women are often paralyzed by that thought, thinking that isn't me, I can't do it. And then we still have that narrative out there saying that muscle is unattractive for a woman. And so therefore a lot of women have that fear of growing too much muscle and being too bulky, which is really hard to do. It was hard to do when we were younger, and it's definitely hard to do when we're older to gain that much muscle that some, we just turn into this big, bulky, hulky woman. And not that there's anything wrong with it, but I'm just saying it's very, very hard to do so. So there's the conversations have to be had on saying what muscle actually is and why it is so important for longevity and for quality of life, and how we are able to do that. And we have to do some sorts of resistance training, but resistance training comes in many shapes or forms. So it does not require you joining a gym or joining a CrossFit or joining some sort of a routine that doesn't suit you. It's all about finding what inspires you and what motivates you to do so.
So if someone's sort of listening in at home, could they use, hand weights or resistance bands, or even just start with some like body weight work, like lunges and squats and things like that too?
100%. I always tell anyone that I talk to start where you are. It is not about buying a bunch of equipment that you don't need, that you don't know if you're going to like it or use it. Start where you are. So if you've never resistance trained, your body is your weight, and there's plenty to be done with it. And there's so many variables within body weight. You can go slower, you can go faster, you can add jumps for plyometric exercises for bone health. There's a million ways to start. And as you progress and get stronger, then yes, we want to add other ways of resistance. This could be bands. This does not, again, it doesn't require spending a ton of money right off the bat and buying these huge weights that you don't need. A lot of people can work out for the rest of their lives just using some bands and a couple of weights, and that's it. Or use your children, or use your bags of sand outside. There's a lot of ways to really make it work without thinking that it's this box of thinking. And really, also, one point I always want to make is we have to find a way to include this type of training in a way that you enjoy. Because if you don't enjoy it, you're not going to continue doing it. And that's just the basic of it. And if resistance training is really something that you are afraid of, I dare you to just look outside that box that you think, that preconceived notion that some women have. There are so many ways to do it.
Yeah. And I'll have to say, I've done obviously Pilates for most of my life using spring resistance and weights. And, there is a big argument out there about whether or not Pilates can be counted as resistance training. But, recently there was a hard rubbish collection. So for us here in Australia, you can put anything that you don't want out on your front nature strip, and the council will come around and take it away, your junk. And one of our neighbors had left out all these kettlebells that they didn't want anymore. And so I collected those and now have been adding them in, for my own workouts, but also, to Pilates exercises and with clients. And it's amazing just over a short period of time how quickly you can build that strength once you start to add in heavier weights as well.
Yes, and you made a great point. And I also want to dive into that discussion of Pilates is not resistance training, because people like to dump on things that are not in their whatever they think it is. So I really hate when people say, well, yoga is not this, and Pilates you can't use for resistance training, which you probably are a big advocate of saying, yes, it is actually. And a lot of yoga is that as well. You need a lot of strength to do that. And when you use strength and body weight, that is by definition resistance training. It's just a different type. And I think you're more limited in how far you can take it, because there's a limit to the resistance you can probably add to some of these things. And then you need more equipment. But to your point, sometimes it's getting a couple of kettlebells, or like I said earlier, time under tension, which is just working slower. So the active part of the exercise is longer. So if we're doing like a squat, if we take 5 seconds into that squat and another 5 seconds to come up, that is adding more resistance just because your muscles under tension for longer. So there's ways to vary things to become more comfortable with resistance training, and to really dip your toe into it before you commit to joining something or buying something. And also learning what your body likes, what you like, you might not really know that you like it, because you might be afraid of squatting because you're tired. If you do a squat, you might not feel comfortable doing it. So a lot of times when you get stronger and you become more confident at doing something, you also become better at it and more confident to continue to adding more. So I dare everyone to always just take that first tiny baby step, and then there's another one. But don't worry about that next step or 10 steps down the road. Really worry about that first step. That's it. And make it really bite-sized chunks, because that's the only way we can go if you are starting out. And then there are women that have been working out their entire life, and they hit the wall in menopause because things that they used to do that worked for them, or that's the term, right, worked for them, are no longer working. And then that's the next frustration of women saying, well, nothing's working anymore. What am I supposed to do now? Everything I've known about exercise doesn't apply anymore. And so that's a different conversation. But if you are just starting out, just start out.
And when it comes to resistance training, how often, or, how many times a week should women be aiming for to really see the benefits of either muscle growth or laying down some bone growth as well?
My recommendation is, if you're just starting out, really aim for 2 days and then add a third day. And then ideally you're doing 4 days a week if you can. But I also like to say that I'd rather have people do shorter amounts of time more often. So if you only have 20 minutes to dedicate, then do 20 minutes 4 times a week rather than one day for 60 minutes, because you're going to get more out of the quantity of it rather than the length and the duration of the actual session that you're doing. Because we know also, just from a health perspective and mortality perspective, the more we move, the better it is. So it's about setting realistic goals and saying, how much time am I willing to commit if I'm just starting out, and then breaking that up into little chunks. But 2 times a week is, for most people, a good starting point. And when you're able to sustainably do that for several weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, then I suggest adding a third one and doing it in that way, rather than saying, I'm going to do this 4 days a week and then realizing that it's too much and then just fall off the wagon. And that's usually what happens when you take on too much. But often when I talk to people and they're saying, well, 2 just doesn't seem enough if I just do 2. And I said, it's plenty to see if we can create a habit and for you to enjoy doing it. And then just add a third one. 2 is more than what you're doing now. So go with a progress.
Yeah, well, that's a great way to look at it, isn't it? Anything, if you're not doing anything currently, then anything is going to be more than what you're doing now, but 2 is a great place to start.
Yes.
Now, when, we just touched on, women often saying that, maybe they have been really active throughout their life and then they hit menopause and they haven't changed anything, but they've gained weight and they're not sure what's changed or, why this has happened, because their diets remain the same, their exercises remain the same. Speaking to these women, what do they need to potentially look at?
Mindset. That becomes the biggest player. And I really do believe that, because in my experience, when people talk about, well, things aren't working anymore, more often than not, they are referring that they are no longer able to manipulate how their body looks with what they're doing, which is adjusting their diet and their exercise. Because when we're younger, we can just take off some calories and shift some things around and work out a little bit more, and things seem to shift and change quicker. And now in midlife, we are also not working with the same body. We're older, our hormones are not in the same place. They're fluctuating during perimenopause and even in postmenopause, although things are more even. We're just not working with the same body, so we can't really expect it to do exactly the same thing as we did before. And because, not to say that you can't adjust things, I think there are a lot of things that we can adjust from a fitness perspective. But in my experience, adjusting the mindset on what we want out of fitness and what we want out of nutrition has to be addressed to be successful, because we're going to hit a wall. You can only, as you know, you can only adjust your nutrition so far. There's only so much tweaking you can do. There's only so much tweaking you can do with fitness as well. And a lot of time people are just waiting to hear this magic thing, but there's got to be something that I can do. I can maybe do a little bit more of that and a little less of that, and then things will just fall into place. And that's just not the case. I do think that when we're looking at fitness, if someone's been doing the same thing, and it already includes resistance training and high impact activities for your bones, and you're already watching your diet and you're doing all the things, there's not much more you can do. You just have to learn that what's the goal that you're trying to achieve besides changing how your body looks. You might not be able to get rid of that belly fat, and you might not be able to get rid of a few extra pounds that you gained. If that were the case, worst case scenario, what would your life look like? Then that's really what I want people to kind of think about. How much more stress do you want to put on yourself tweaking things? But at the same time, sometimes women have been doing a lot of long distance aerobic exercise and never doing any resistance training, or they're doing a lot of high impact activities again and not doing a little bit of heavier lifting. We do know that those things are really beneficial for women from a bone perspective, from a muscle perspective. So those would be the first things that I would look at when I talk to someone. So if you're not consistently doing resistance training 2 or 3 times a week in a heavier, somewhere in that 8 to 12 repetition range, so weights that are heavy enough for you to be able to work out in that range, that's where you need to start. So if you're not doing that in your workout routine, that's a good start that will help you from a metabolic perspective, from a muscle perspective. And we know when muscle is more metabolically active, so there's a good chance that you will change how you look by gaining more muscle.
And I think you bring up some really good points that so many of us are often focused on how we're going to look like we're exercising because we want to look a certain way, but we really need to think about, well, it's going to prevent us from falling. We're going to have better longevity, all of, better brain health as well. So many studies linking back to that. So I think, as you said, it's changing that mindset, changing that focus, rather than just being so image orientated as such.
Yes. And I think we do have to, there's more conversations around this, but we have to change our goals for fitness to be less how we look and more of what we can do. When we focus more on what we're able to do, then that is a tangible goal. If you say, hey, I want to run a marathon, or I want to hike this big mountain, or I want to, having a quantitative, like a goal that you can train for, you can reach that. You might not look different, but you are able to run that marathon. You're able to hike that mountain. You're able to do whatever you set your mind to do. But that is not dependent on how you look necessarily. And that's what I want people to really realize. Your goals are not dependent on the way that you look, because your abilities are not related to the way that you look. It is related on how much muscle you have, what your bone strength is, how you're able to move, your mobility. Those things are things that are actually they could be detrimental to your life if you don't have them. The less muscle you have, we know this, the less muscle you have, the less able you are to fight off disease. That if your bones aren't strong, you're more likely to break a bone. The more likely you are to break a bone, your mortality goes up. These are things that we know that we can prevent. Can I tell you that you're going to lose that belly fat you had? I can't guarantee that, nor can anybody else guarantee that. But because menopause is having such a moment, we are now being inundated, and you probably see these as well, with ads, because everyone's a menopause coach now, and everyone is an expert, and everyone has now rebranded whatever they had before. Now is a hormone balancing workout. It's a hormone balancing diet, which are both not a thing. don't exist. You can't balance your hormones with exercise. Like, it's not a thing. You have to go to an endocrinologist or to your menopause practitioner to to adjust your hormones. And those are medical professionals.
Yeah. And there is a lot, as you said, there is a lot more kind of coming out there and being rebranded because it is such a hot topic at the minute. But for anybody listening in that say maybe they're suffering from some joint pain or arthritis and they're thinking, well, lifting weight sounds great, but I've got joint pain, so I don't think it's safe for me. What advice do you have to those people?
Well, first of all, joint pain and arthritis, these are common menopause related symptoms. So if pain becomes really intense and it's never been like that before, that would be something to go and talk to your doctor about, to look at what the options are from a medical perspective, because that is an actual symptom. And a lot of women don't realize that muscular pain and joint pain could be symptoms of your hormones changing. It's a thing. But we know that exercise is really beneficial for arthritis and for joint health, but it does require some adjustments. It might need a lot more warm up because arthritical joints hurt, so we need more warm up. That it might not feel good to do high impact exercises when you have arthritis. So it's working within those parameters where you have a lot of times your hands hurt, you might not be able to hold on to a heavy weight. So using bands or so making those adjustments that are necessary. Just like I said earlier, there are ways to include resistance training for the body that you're in right now with the aches and pains or whatever the situation is right now. You have to reach out to a fitness professional that knows their stuff, or there's a lot of people like me out there that will answer basic questions, or that have channels, YouTube channels, and on their Instagrams or newsletters that share a lot of really good advice when it comes to these special situations. But I wouldn't want people to shy away because of that, because there's ways to work around it. And the benefits that you get from including resistance training are much larger than the pain that you're feeling right now. And it might help with the pain.
Well, I have a lot of clients that I work with that are older and have arthritis, and they definitely always report that it helps with the pain. And a little bit like what you said, I've got, normal hand weights, but I've also got weights that are filled with rice. So they don't have to like grip to hold the weight. They can actually sort of slip it over their hand and it's much softer to hold. And, we've got other ways and things to use that we don't have to feel like you have to grip and potentially feel like that pain is getting worse when you're working out. So I totally agree with what you said. And if you can find somebody that you can work with, that's sort of trained in that area, I think that can be really beneficial if you're a bit wary or scared as well around your joint pain too.
Yes, it is. There's a lot of scammers out there, but there's a lot of really good people out there as well that want to help people weed through that noise and tune out all of that selling and selling and selling. Because if you find someone that has the experience to work with you, they can make a huge difference. And I know that for some people, it's the budgetary barrier. They're saying, well, I just don't have the money to work with a personal trainer. But first of all, there are a lot of free resources out there, but I recommend trying to look beyond. You don't have to work with someone all the time. You can have a session with someone to just a consultation. Here's where I'm at. What can I do? And get some basics to understand where you need to be and get some ideas sometimes. That's all you need. So it's not a commitment looking down the line. A lot of times it can be really nice to find a group session or to share the cost with a friend. That's accountability right there as well. But again, I understand that it's a huge cost if you have to pay out of pocket to work with someone. But there are a lot of really good resources out there for beginner videos or beginner tips to just get you started.
And there's so much online now, I think, too, that you can do it from your own home without having to go to a class as such. But I also think on the flip side of that, if you can go to a class, you may learn from the instructor, but then you'll learn from other people in the class and you'll have that connection too, which is so amazing for your health as well.
Yes, yes, I completely agree. The community aspect becomes huge from an accountability perspective, from a fun perspective. It's a lot more fun when you go and meet someone and you know so-and-so is going to be in the class and you get to chat a little bit and afterwards or before. There's a component to that makes it sustainable and fun to continue doing, even if that class discontinues and the coach changes. It's the group that keeps going. And I've witnessed that in my group coaching. I did group coaching for over 15 years. And that was part of the fun. Wasn't because I was so awesome. It was because I was able to create a community and a fun, like everyone that came in, they're like, oh, hey, so-and-so and so-and-so. And then, we got our butts kicked, but that was almost the secondary part. It was fun to go there and to meet people. So if you are, and there's also, walking partners. If you're just starting out, if you can find a friend to go and take a stroll with you, get started where you are now. Again, take the barriers away from that overwhelming feeling that you need to sign up for something or that you need to commit to this 12-week program or this 8-week program or whatever it is. Take it one day at a time. And if you're not sure that you can do it, enlist someone. Everyone has a friend. Find a friend, find a virtual friend or someone that you can, if your best friend lives across on the other side of the universe, you get on the phone and say, hey, every time at this hour, let's go on a walk together, and you chat while you're on the walk, or your accountability partners. It is a lot easier when you can share it with someone else. And so that would be the tip, to just get started as well.
Yeah, I agree. And even just on that walking part, I was listening to a podcast quite a while ago now, but they were talking about rucking and how they were using a backpack and putting just progressive load, like weight, in the backpack, and they were building up that weight. So they were, getting their walking, getting their cardiovascular exercise, but also getting some resistance training in at the same time, which I think is one thing maybe a lot of people haven't thought about before.
Yes, and that's the whole point, is that we have to stop thinking that resistance training is this or it's that. The sad part is that there are just too many people out there downplaying, not even downplaying, downright talking badly about some sorts of exercise are better than others. And if you don't do this, then you might as well just not do anything at all, because we know that this is the absolute best exercise you could ever do. And walking is nothing. And, we having these conversations where people with millions of followers are saying that walking is not exercise. Since when? Walking is the most accessible type of exercise we can have. Is it the same as lifting heavy weights? No, but you can't say that this is better than the other. It's what you want as your goal. And again, it comes down to goals. What is your goal? Is it just to start moving, or is it to, again, what is it? What's the goal? And to say that walking is an exercise is so elitist, because a lot of people don't have the means to do anything else. And walking is very accessible. And that is a big deal. Get walking, just start walking, because the next step is something else. Then you might be able to feel motivated to do some push-ups in your house when you feel like you're able to, you've moved up to that. So one of the things that I always try to get people to realize is also that there is this built-in hierarchy to exercise, that we have learned to say, this is better, and then this is here, and then this is here, and at the bottom is something that someone made up is the bottom, which is not true. Every type of exercise has its own benefits. Pilates has a place, yoga has a place, Tai Chi has a place, resistance training has its place, and within resistance training, there's CrossFit, there's all of these different types of pockets. There's not one thing that is better than the other, because all of them have a different end result. And so it becomes a toolbox. I always tell people to build a toolbox of exercises. We don't grab a screwdriver to do to nail in a nail, to hammer in a nail, we also are not going to do yoga for our cardiovascular health. But running is great for that, but yoga is great for all the other things. So looking at exercise as this broad buffet takes away a little bit of that, oh my God, if I only have 1 hour a week, I do have to do this one thing because I've been told that this is the best thing to do. And then they don't do it because they don't really want to do it. So it becomes saying, well, you know what, today I want to take a bite out of dancing. Tomorrow I want to take a bite out of yoga. And today I just feel like I don't want to do anything. So having that flexibility, especially during menopause, becomes one of the biggest tools and gifts that you can give yourself, which is all about mindset. And that kind of circles back around to the part of learning to be kinder to yourself, to be more flexible in your approach to movement, and to be more flexible into your approach to liking yourself and how you see yourself. This is the time to reinvent how you see yourself and how you see your life. It really is the perfect time to do it. If we're not doing it now, we're not going to do it later.
Exactly. And I know even within my classes, when I'm teaching clients, I do have that flexibility with clients because I've got smaller numbers and, working individually with people. So I will tailor their workout depending on how they're feeling on the day, depending on what time of the month it is, if they're still menstruating, what their goals are. And sometimes we will add in heavier resistance work because they will say to me, Kate, I am not going to do this outside of class because I just don't have the motivation. And so I know, all right, well, if I've got 2 hours with you a week, we're going to add in weights, we're going to add in balance work, we're going to add in, that resistance training that you need you've freely admitted that you're not going to do outside of class.
And that's beautiful. And when you say, another part of menopause is the constant difference and challenge. Menopause is not a linear experience. We don't start over here and then the hormones just decline steadily until we get to the other end of it all, where it's always the same. It's like this, like it's constantly like this. So you can't, even if you set yourself up to saying, tomorrow I'm going to do this, and this whole week I have it all planned out. I'm going to work out this here and then there, and I'm going to have this. And then you have an insomnia period for 3 days where you just haven't slept. You're not going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do your high intensity interval training after you haven't slept for 3 days. That's unrealistic to think. So that approach to saying every day, taking just a minute to say, where am I at today? How was my night? And how do I feel? And then if it still fits within your plan, go for it. But have the grace and the kindness to yourself to say, this was a great plan, but I'm not there today because of whatever happens. And menopause also doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not like life stops and menopause hits. It's life is there and menopause hits on top of it. So it's the challenges of normal life, which is family, careers, whatever else is going on, and then menopause on top of it, just to weigh you down a little bit more. So there are those challenges that come on top. So we have to realize that it is challenging. For some of us, it's incredibly challenging. It can be paralyzing. It can be life-changing. And for some, it's a period stops one day and the next day they're in postmenopause and they don't have any symptoms. And that's great for those that have that. But we do have to realize that 80% of people will have some sort of symptoms. Not everyone will have a horrible time, but most will be rattled at least a little bit.
Well, I haven't hit menopause yet, but I know a lot of clients that have had many different symptoms. And they have said, you know, by adjusting the exercise that they're doing, leaning into, say, more yoga or even breath work or Pilates, it actually has helped with different symptoms. So I think exercise can be one of those things that can really help. But as you said, listening to your body, and it may be a time in your life where you do need to start to change things up, which is not necessarily a bad thing, you know, but it might be a time to try, you know, a different form of exercise to see if that can help alleviate some of the symptoms as well.
Yes, and it's a great point that you make, because we know, I mean, science around menopause and exercise is still very, very, very small. So you kind of have to use yourself as a guinea pig and figure out what works for you. I love high intensity interval training for myself. I've always been very fast and furious. I get bored. Anything that's more than 20 minutes, I get bored. But I have found that high intensity stuff makes me have hot flashes more often than not. And so I have to have that balance of saying, how much do I want this high intensity workout if the price is me having night sweats? So figuring out what each exercise does for you from a menopausal perspective. If you know that yoga really eases your mind and you're able to sleep, which is a big deal, then that's a big deal. So do yoga and prioritize mindfulness and those exercises that are a little gentler on your body versus the high intensity part, because you might be able to put this back in down the road, because the truth is that symptoms don't come in blocks. You don't have hot flashes, and then when they go away, you're like, ooh, nice, done that one, moving on to the next level. It might be done, but it might come back 6 months later. And that's how it works. So you can't say, ooh, now that I've checked the box of this, I can move on to something else. It's a lot of different things that can happen here and then can happen there and then can disappear completely for a year. And then just when you think it's all done, it comes right back in a different form. And so being informed about these things, and was what I was mentioning earlier with the toolbox is invaluable for you. If you start collecting that data about yourself, noticing if I eat this or that. A lot of women report that if they drink alcohol, especially at night, they get hot flashes or night sweats. Some women are not impacted at all. And that's great. But different foods tend to either give them GI issues that never had. For me, I currently have a really hard time eating in the morning, which was something that I really, really enjoyed always. And now I have to wait at least an hour or two in the morning before I can eat something so I don't get nauseous. And I'm 100% sure is menopause. That's just doing it for me. So instead of fighting it and swallowing things down and making myself nauseous because I know I need to eat, I try to be kinder to myself and say, there's nothing bad that will happen, but can I have a protein shake, or maybe I can have some collagen in my coffee so I can get some nutrition? So figuring out these kind of little things, the same with movement. Figure out what makes some of those symptoms feel better and then implement more of those. And then know that you're not giving up on the things that you used to love, because you'll be able to do those again. But don't force yourself so hard to stick with what you always did because it worked or because you really love it, to the detriment of, having worse nights and hot flash night sweats. The sleep part is the biggest part. If you don't sleep, nothing else functions.
Yeah, I agree. Even not being there yet, just having kids and stuff, if you don't get a good night's sleep, then nothing is as good the next day.
I mean, it is. When I had my daughter the first year, I don't think I slept more than 2 hours at a time. And that, I don't know how I made it, but it is the same kind of thing. Everyone has experienced this. When you don't sleep, it's really hard. And insomnia and sleep issues are a symptom that a lot of women experience, and that can derail your movement practice. And so saying it's all or none it's an approach that we have to really get over. being kinder and implementing these things that help us move, whatever that movement is, even if it isn't resistance training, it's just moving. We just need to move and finding different ways to do it. We have experimenting with new movements. What is something that you really always wanted to do? Maybe you wanted to take that hip hop class down at the community center, but you never really thought there was the right time, and now this might be the right time to do it. So just finding ways to find joy in movement and exploring with some things that you've never done, and thinking outside that box, it can be incredibly valuable. And sometimes you're done with something. You thought that you really always wanted to do this one thing until you try something else and you're like, oh my God, I did never realize that this was so much fun. And this is where you are. So exploring.
Yeah. And as you said, finding that joy in movement, I think is, one of those things that it motivates you to continue to do it. You can find a new hobby, you can make those connections. So finding that joy is a big part of, continuing to do that over and over.
Yes, the joy part is the secret ingredient in movement and nutrition as well. When we're talking about food, if you're not enjoying what you're eating, why does it matter? It should really be something that soothes your soul and your body, but it has to be joyful when you're eating it in mindfulness. And all of those coming together is such a big deal. And when we reach this time in our lives, I think, and I'm not 100% on this number, but I think most women, there's an average, women have already been on 40 diets by the time they reach menopause. That's a lot. And the same with fitness fads. We've all done them. There's been all of the crazes. Everyone signed up for things and bought these challenges and bought these programs that they don't do, and have all of those exercise equipments that they bought on QVC that are under the bed, hidden somewhere. We've all done it. And if we've all experienced this. This is not a unique situation. Right now is the right time to take a break and say, I don't want to do this anymore. I have experienced all of this. I want to get off the hamster wheel. It's just they put a different name on it. They put a different technique to it. But in essence, movement is movement. It's always been the same. You can put a different label on it. The same with nutrition. You can call it a non-diet or a lifestyle. But it's still a diet. More than often, it's a diet if it's sold in some sort of a way. The same with movement. You have to ask yourself, is this how you want to continue on? Knowing that the things that you've done before haven't worked, but now it's being sold in a different package and you're tempted to sign up for it, but you really know it's not there. We know that quick fixes don't work. We know that it doesn't work. We know diets don't work. We know big body transformations don't work. Biggest Loser, we have the data. It doesn't work. And so it's a heart-to-heart. I tell people, this is the time to sit down and have a heart-to-heart with yourself and have those conversations saying, do you want to switch, or do you want to stay on that train? Because if you want to stay on that train, that's no judgment. That's where you want to go. But if you're tired of the fight and the stress that comes with trying to find the magic grail of food and exercise, it doesn't exist. You are the one that has to find what works for you and be okay with that decision. And there's no wrong decision, really.
Mm. And before we wrap up, I always love to ask my guests that if there was one piece of advice that our listeners could go off and instigate straight away after listening to this podcast, what would you suggest?
To move a little bit more tomorrow than you did today, even if that is just a different step. That is the part. And I'm giving 2 tips. The joy part is just so important. You have to find movement that is joyful to you without any other expectations. That is the secret sauce. There is nothing else. If there's no joy, then you're not going to be able to stick with it, no matter what I tell you to do. I could tell you to lift weights 5 times a week. If you don't enjoy it, you're not going to do it. So find, without anybody else telling you anything else, what brings a smile to your face that's movement related, that is what you need to pursue. If it makes you just, it warms your heart, that's what you need to do, no matter what anybody else says.
Well, I love that, because I do think joy is, a big part. And as we were saying before, if I use the example of Pilates, that's one of my joys. But now knowing that, I'm getting older and I need to add in more weights, I've added more weights into the workout. So, and as we were talking about before, you can do shorter walks. You can add, a weight pack to your walks and make it more resistance. You could do longer walks or faster to get more cardio. So whatever movement you pick that you find your joy in, you can usually adapt it to whatever goals you really want.
Yes, 100%. There's every movement that you do, you can somehow add a resistance part to it. Most of the ones. However, you do have to let go of what other people say is the way that to do it the right way. You have to find what your right way is and what your joyful way is. And that's the hardest part, to tune out that noise. And so when that is there, when you find that little spark, then it's all downhill from there. And downhill it's easier from there, not downhill as like it gets worse.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Where can our listeners reach out and connect with you?
I'm on Instagram at Dr. Maria Luque, but the best way is really to sign up for my newsletter, which is on my website at fitnessinmenopause.com. And you can also contact me through my website. And I always encourage people to, if they have basic questions or they just want to ping me, that's the best way to do it, just to email me through the website. And I have a newsletter that goes out every week, and I try to just share practical advice. And that's the best way to do it.
Amazing. Well, I'll link those all up in the show notes too. So listeners, head on over to the show notes and you'll be able to find all those ways that you can make contact with Maria there also. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Maria. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad we were able to make it work. I hope your listeners get some value from this.